Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Gitcast podcast. Just before me and Flash Suppressors start shooting our yaps and start yammering about whatever, I'd like to apologise for the slightly clunky audio in the last episode. I did have some technical problems with Sony Vegas in editing that one. Managed to overcome them for the most part though, and hopefully this one won't be as shaky, shall we just say. But this, and also I should just mention that this this episode of the Gitcast podcast will be slightly shorter than the last few ones, so apologies about that again. But not much has happened in the last week since me and Phil did one of these. We've done a few things, and we've got a couple of things to chat about, but not much else other than that. But I guess, as always, we could try starting by breaking the ice with how our previous week has been since we did the last episode. So why don't you go first?
Well, thank you. My previous week has been pretty nice, I have to say. Apart from our two activities together, I also tried archery tag.
Really? What?
Yeah.
What's that?
That's basically archery with sort of fairly low-powered bows with arrows that have sort of foam-tipped ends, and you run around shooting at each other with them.
Oh my god, that sounds amazing.
It is great. I would have invited you to come along and try it out, but it's on a Saturday evening, and I know you're busy then.
Yeah. I do think though, if I would ever get the chance, I would try that out though, because that does sound hilarious.
Yeah, it was.
And did you do anything else aside from the stuff we did like yesterday and on Monday?
Under fire. Oh my goodness me. So I once again did my usual park run.
Okay, cool.
My sort of Saturday morning fun run that I do every week.
Yeah.
It was pretty nice. And it was my father's birthday last week, but he was away from home that day. So we decided to have his birthday celebration last Sunday instead.
All right.
And because I'm here in Britain studying and they're over in Germany.
Phil, quick over here where I am.
Yeah, no, I see it. I'm moving.
Yeah, sorry. So you did it over Skype, didn't you? The actual formal celebration on the day.
Yes, indeed.
That sounds quite nice. At least you were able to celebrate in some sense or another.
Yes, well, yes, it was just like I was there. I had my own little bit of cake and a drink, and they had their cake and a drink, and I could see my father opening his presents and so on, and it was all rather jolly. It's sort of like that one episode of The Big Bang Theory where Sheldon sort of makes a little robot with a screen and he decides he's just going to stay in his room forever. But yeah, no, it was all jolly nice. I have to say, Skype is a huge boon these days. I mean, back in my mother's day, you couldn't sort of phone home just whenever you fancied it.
No.
You had to sort of save up your money and go to the pay phone around the corner and all the rest of it.
What's good as well is now even further on from the birth of like Skype, you also now have other platforms that are similar to it, like Discord. So you have other options for like voice and phone, like voice calls on your computer on top of Skype, which is already, like you said, pretty useful.
Yeah.
So yeah, all hail the age of technology. I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. But yeah, no, it is definitely a fantastic tool for keeping in touch with people on long distance bases. So what kind of cake and drink did you have on the day?
Well, normally I like to bake my own, but this year I just didn't have sufficient time to do that. So I ended up buying myself a apple, caramel and maple syrup cake from the supermarket.
Which supermarket was it?
The Co-op.
They do pretty good cakes, actually.
They do rather nice cakes, don't they?
Yeah, I think I said this to you yesterday. I particularly like their red velvet cake. That's always tickled my fancy.
Yeah, I quite like some red velvet cupcakes sometimes.
Oh god, yeah, totally. What did I do?
In terms of food, it was Pancake Day quite recently, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. I was going to say, I had with my pancakes, I didn't really have enough time or could be bothered to make my own. I must regretfully admit. So I got some nice pre-made butterscotch pancakes from Waitrose, and I had them with like some maple syrup and a bit of lemon juice. They were bloody good, I must say. What did you have on yours?
Well, I didn't have any yesterday because I felt that I'd had sufficient amounts of sweet stuff over the past few days and on our trip out yesterday. So, yeah, I just think that the pancakes that we had in the Sci-Fi and Horror Society would be sufficient for this year.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Also, because when I was over for Christmas, we had some pancakes then because my mother had bought loads of eggs in anticipation of having to do some baking, but she then ended up not having to, so to use them up, we decided to have pancakes early.
I like her style.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I'm always up for pancakes. But I was going to say, actually, when me and Phil went to the most recent meeting of the Sussex Sci-Fi and Horror Society, as of this video coming out, you brought along some like white chocolate chip pancakes packaged up like Eccles cakes, and I was going to ask actually, where did you get them?
I got those from Asda.
Really?
Yeah, I think I've never seen sort of pancakes, thick ones, sort of Scottish style, in a packet like that in any other supermarket, to be quite honest. I mean, outside of Scotland, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just remembered having them a few years ago, and I remember when I was up in Scotland with my grandmother, you know, getting some pancakes like that from the supermarket and having some maple syrup over them was something that would be an occasional treat. I mean, they were basically like sort of extra soft white chocolate chip cookies, basically.
Good, yeah. No.
Yeah, but they're very, very sweet.
They were.
And quite tangy, so you can't have lots of them.
I was thinking when you gave me one on Monday, I was thinking that the dough itself of the pancake could have been a little bit more not bitter or salty, but just a bit more mild in taste, I think, to complement the sort of sheer sweetness of the white chocolate that was in it. But to be honest with you, I do remember them being pretty nice, so I won't complain too much.
Yeah, definitely. Before we move on to talking about what we saw at the Sci-Fi and Horror Society, how was your week?
Oh yeah, I was going to talk about that, wasn't I? Yeah, haven't done really much over the last week. Kind of same as you, just been trying to find some more activities to do. Sort of like just been getting together the footage to do another vlog and also the next episode of the Dawn of War 2 playthrough. Not really much actually, to be honest. I think probably the most notable things I've done over the last week is go to the Sussex Sci-Fi and Horror Society this past Monday with you, and also our day out this past Tuesday as well. So yeah, it's a bit hard to say really. Apart from that, not much else really, to be honest. I did make quite a nice dish recently that was basically spaghetti with mustard, fried brown onions, peas and Cumberland sausages in it. It's kind of like a very ad hoc sort of carbonara, but without like the cream and stuff. But yeah, apart from that, I haven't really done much recently. Last week has just been kind of a bit quiet for me.
Yeah, fair enough. Shall we talk about what we did yesterday then, our little trip out?
Could do. Would you rather speak chronologically or about like what is more fresher in our minds then? Because we did do the Sussex Sci-Fi and Horror Society on Monday before that.
That is true. Yeah, I would suggest then that we talk about the Sci-Fi and Horror Society first, shall we?
Yeah, sure thing. So, me and Phil, as we've probably mentioned in previous episodes of the podcast, members of the... well, not members, because they don't really ask for membership. They're kind of pretty open-minded and chilled out. To the Sussex Sci-Fi and Horror Society and at the University of Sussex. Mm-hmm. And this past week...
Well, I technically am a member because I signed up online. It's free either way, and I just thought, you know, might as well credit them with sort of a larger number of people so they get a bit more prestige if that's a factor.
I guess so. Yeah, that's a fair point of way of looking at it. But we vote on like films of like pertaining to a theme of the week each week to watch, and they're always either sci-fi, horror, or both. And this week was Valentine's week, of course, and so a lot the films that were being voted on were all had like at least some like considerable component of them being dedicated to romance and love and all that. And
Yeah.
the film that ended up getting voted in was the very decent and somewhat underappreciated, although I wouldn't necessarily say underrated, um, film Source Code, which I remember actually seeing when when it came out way back when, some years ago with my cousin, because I remember seeing it first when it came out in the cinema and quite enjoying it back then. But while it isn't certainly a bad film, and while it isn't certainly, I wouldn't even say it's mediocre. I would say it's just maybe just slightly above average. I don't think it's as good as I remember it from back when I first saw it.
Hmm.
I mean, it's got some great performances in it, particularly from the main leading actor. What's his name? Which one was it? Oh yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal. And to be fair, he had a few good performances in and around 2011 when the film came out in other sort of projects as well. So
Yeah.
he was having a good role at the time. And I'd say for me, it's probably the best thing about the film because it's probably one of his better performances, really. That and also the concept of the film itself and its plot is fairly interesting, actually. While it's probably well, it is fairly rooted in science fiction rather than hard science. It's still an interesting topic to sort of like think about, like if it could actually be explored and could actually be real.
Yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, the pseudoscience wasn't particularly well developed, though, I have to say.
I do think though that the filmmakers kind of did that as a way of just making it purposefully vague, because you got to think if they like tried to like overly explain it, even though it's clearly science fiction, that may have ended up just bringing in a load of plot holes and cheesed a lot of people off, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
I mean, what do you think? Because like, I think when I resaw
I
it,
think that they sort of deliberately left things a bit vague. You're right there. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to do.
do you think it was particularly egregious in this case, though, just from your
No.
perspective?
Not particularly.
No. I mean, I'm not going to say like the story was the absolute best, and it's not even the best story out of any of Jake Gyllenhaal's films, but I do think that had they kind of gone to like overly explaining the concept of the film and why Jake Gyllenhaal is having all these crazy sort of experiences on this train where he's been tasked to stop a terrorist from taking a bomb and
Yeah.
blowing up a large part of Boston, I think it was.
Chicago, I think.
Oh, Chicago. Okay, my mistake. And the concept of how he's able to keep travelling to this same point in time and keep doing that over and over again is slowly explained bit by bit throughout the film. And I do feel like if they had gone for fully explaining it, because it's clearly a piece of technology that hasn't even been delved into yet.
Yeah.
If they'd gone full on into explaining it before the technology's even been infantilized or put into
Yeah, before it's even in its infancy, yeah.
yeah. Then they would have, of course, incurred some sort of plot hole to open up. But I think it's good because they did base it off of clearly science fiction and didn't try to make it seem anything other than such.
Yeah, so it was an interesting sort of psychological... There was a bit of a psychological horror element to it as well, I think.
Yeah, to a certain degree there was, actually, yeah.
Which I thought was actually the film's best point, to be honest.
What, when they reveal like how he's able to do that and why he's there on the behest of these government goons.
Yeah.
I tell you what, that's actually quite a good point because like the thing is, the motivation of the people he's working for in the film, like the general aim, I think, of their cause, as they explain it throughout the plot, is generally a good thing. But the methodology in which they're using to do it, and how they're using Jake Gyllenhaal to do it, once you sort of like look into it and how they're doing it, it does like appear like I can understand why they're doing this, but their methodology for doing it is very morally suspect.
Yes, indeed. Returning to sort of the aesthetics of the film, I do admit I have a bit of a soft spot for things where, it's kind of like a Cluedo situation where people are thrown together in a confined environment. You have a certain number of suspects. And I also have a softness for Groundhog Day style going back in time repeatedly, like in a video game. In fact, it reminds me a lot of well, first of all, that film that had umpteen different titles to the point where I can't remember what it actually was called, with Tom Cruise in it, where he goes back in time repeatedly in a sort of war zone to try and to progressively become better. And it also reminded me of...
Was it Edge of Tomorrow, that one?
Edge of Tomorrow, yes, that's it. That's one of its several titles. And Life is Strange, the video game as well, particularly in that you can't go very far back in time. That's unusual. That's quite interesting, because quite a lot of the time when you go back in time, you have a day, maybe even a bit more. In this case, it was 8 minutes.
Yeah, it's like very
each time. I thought that was genuinely quite interesting.
Yeah. It's I think it's best with these kind of films to, again, not to like kind of pussyfoot around it too much, but it's probably a good idea to leave it up to the audience of this podcast to decide for themselves if they want to see it, because the concept and plot of the film is largely based around plot twists and the main character acting as sort of like a audience surrogate to sort of like slowly piece together the plot.
Yes, and it is actually kind of a detective story for a while, and it's a detective story where the audience actually has a decent chance of working out the culprit.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
The audience should never know more or less than the main character, I think. Or at least very rarely. You have to have a very good excuse for that.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, for me, I think it's sort of what's the standard for what a sort of high-budget film ought to be. It's not great, but it's certainly not bad. It's just good. It was fun to watch. It had interesting ideas, and it took advantage of most of them.
Yeah, I definitely think so as well. I think like there is a certain extent of they could have maybe explored certain parts of the character of like the love interest a little bit more, and the acting wasn't wholesale great. The writing wasn't stellar, and the plot was a little bit. If you take away the concepts of the plot itself on a naked level is a little bit sort of thin, but aside from that, I'd still say it's a very decent thriller. It's not an out-and-out action film, but it's a very decent thriller with a lot of plot twists that aren't too heavily shoved down your throat. Some are sort of like revealed quite suddenly, and others are revealed quite subtly. So I think generally it's a well-balanced film. I don't think it's bad. But I don't think it's great either. I generally think if I was to give it an overall rating, I'd probably say something like a 6.5 out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if I were to give it a numerical rating as well, I would give it like a 3 out of 5 stars kind of thing. This is the perfect average of what a film should be, basically.
Yeah, or I think just at least slightly above average, because to be honest with you, 2011 was a pretty mediocre year for blockbuster, big action and thriller films. And this was actually one of the few ones in that year that was actually pretty decent, so I'd say that's probably fair from my personal perspective, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so too. I think that about wraps up the film portion of the podcast.
Yes, indeed.
Unless, have we seen any others, really?
Well, apart from Your Name and 12 Strong, which we saw in the last couple of weeks, not really, did we?
No.
I just haven't had much time to sort of see any films recently over the last couple of months, so it's like it was quite a nice break in the last couple of weeks when we've seen about like 3 or 4 in just the last couple of weeks. You know, we saw that, we saw 12 Strong, we saw Your Name, we watched the DVD of Semi-Pro at my place. Yeah, in like the 2 or 3 months before that, I saw almost no films. So.
Wow. Yeah.
Just trying to think. Yeah, no, I think that's basically about it. Actually, something also in the last 2 or 3 months that we didn't do a lot of was Gone Lads Days Out, wasn't it? And I think
that's true.
I think hadn't we been planning our aforementioned day out that we did yesterday for quite a while?
I think so. Yes, at least a few weeks.
Because I remember it was better planned than some of the other Lads Days Out, the one that we did yesterday, and
yeah, it wasn't any sort of wild adventures.
No.
We didn't go to another town. We just went for a nice trip out into Brighton.
What street was? What was the name of the blooming street again? Because I keep calling it the road that goes underneath the entrance to the train station.
Yeah, I need. Isn't that North Street?
No, that's not North Street. God damn it, Phil.
No, North Road. Sorry, North Road.
I don't think it's that either.
No.
I'm gonna have to look up Brighton train station and just see where.
Yeah,
it's
have a
on
look.
the map to just check what the actual location of it is. Because it's really bugging me. Like I like that area of the city so much, and yet it's like I've been suggesting for a while that we go on a lads' day out there. I keep forgetting what the bloody name of that place is. Oh yeah, Trafalgar Street.
Oh yeah, that makes sense because that's where the Nelson pub is.
Yeah, yeah. Me and Phil went out yesterday, as in on Tuesday the 13th of this month, to Trafalgar Street in Brighton, which is a nice little road that goes underneath the entrance to the Brighton train station, and is home to several very nice cafes, some decent pubs, and a couple of like nerdy DVD and like comic shops, as well as a couple of very decent alcohol and liquor shops as well. And
yes,
we had quite the compact but quite the entertaining day out, didn't we?
Yes, we did. First of all, we went to the Brighton Toy and Model Museum, which is always a joy.
Which I've never been in before, and it's always been there on the precipice of like my mind to go to, but I never just got round to it. But had you been in it before?
Yes, I had once several years ago.
Yeah.
I think they've actually improved it since then, to be honest.
Yeah, because we filmed a vlog while we were there, and I think I did ask you that, actually. I wish I'd gone to it sooner, though, but in what way did it improve since you last went there?
They had a lot more information about the models and the toys they had on display.
Oh.
Yeah. I think they must have got a collection and then researched it back.
So, was it just like very simplistic when you first went there yourself?
Yes, it was. It was still good, but no, it's definitely got better.
Which is quite amazing as well, because like most of their money is built just from people buying merch and like entrance tickets, and I think like both the people we ran into at the entrance till were I think they're both volunteers, weren't they? So
they were definitely volunteers, yeah.
So they weren't doing it for money either, which I found quite admirable, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh dear, I didn't see that tank destroyer coming. I was going to say, one criticism that I would have, though, is that it wasn't particularly expensive even now. Although to be fair, like from what you've explained, it does seem like they've improved a lot since you last went. And
Oh yeah, definitely.
in all fairness, the building itself was built underneath the foundations of the entrance to Brighton train station, so it's not going to be a big place anyway. And I think they've done as good as they can with the facilities they've been
Yeah,
acquitted with.
definitely. And I mean, it's not something that everyone who goes to Brighton will go and see. It's a very sort of niche kind of subject area. Unless you're into modelling, trains, old toys, that kind of thing, generally, you're not going to go to it, really, are you?
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, that is true. And plus, also, the part of Trafalgar Street it's on is fairly tucked out of the way of the mainstream part of Brighton, so it's not going to get a huge amount of people flocking to it anyway.
No.
Even more so because it is a fairly smallish sort of museum in the first place. But one thing that we went to afterwards, actually, that I hadn't been to in about 3 or so years, was this cafe called Milk No Sugar, just down the road from it.
Actually, I think it's called Rio. I'm not entirely sure what it's called, to be honest.
I don't think it is, actually. I've never seen the sign saying Rio over it.
Really?
Myself.
There's a big black sign with the letters Rio sticking out of it. I don't know.
No, the sign for the place, I'm pretty sure, says Milk No Sugar. And it's like white with black writing.
Huh.
Okay. We'll have to double check that after we record anyway.
We will, because maybe in that case I've been getting the name of the cafe wrong this whole time.
Possibly.
I mean, in fairness, it is kind of difficult.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of
because there's lots of cafes all bunched up next to each other.
Yeah, and they all have like similar colour schemes as well. But
yeah.
Basically, I hadn't been to this cafe in particular in like about 3 years, and it's this nice little Korean sort of like cafe on Trafalgar Street that does a lot of Dauphin soup, some Dan Bien Pien sandwiches, and also does like a lot of like nice hot drinks and cakes and.
Yeah, and they've got some like books that you can just pick up and read if you fancy it.
Yeah, and it's and they've got some Korean. Oh, is that your landlord's kitty cat?
Yes.
And they've got some Korean pop going on in the background on the regular.
Yeah. Definitely, or Vietnamese or whatever it was.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Vietnamese. My mistake. Oh my god. Because it was the Vietnamese place. Please, anti-racism. Please don't come after me. But yeah, it's a really nice little Vietnamese cafe. If you do want a quick bit of Vietnamese grub, I definitely recommend it. It's not like a kind of like dinner place or anything like that. But if you want to get a quick bit of lunch or some quick coffee and cake, it's
if you're in Brighton about to catch a train and you have some time to go and get some lunch, go there.
Yeah, and even more so because they've got free Wi-Fi in there. Plus, like Phil said, they've got some books to read in there, so you can you can kill a couple of hours in there if you want to.
Yeah, easily.
What is that cat doing? Is she right on top of the keyboard or something?
She sometimes likes to walk across the keyboard. At the moment, she's just standing next to me.
Oh, right, okay. I was just wondering why the meowing was particularly loud.
Yeah, no, she does sort of get quite entitled, don't you? Eh? Come on. Go away. Thank you. Right.
How old is that cat again?
She is in her late teens. We don't know her exact age, but she's at least 17.
What, in cat years?
No, in human years.
That means she's bloody ancient in cat years, then.
Yeah, she is.
That means then that she's... God, probably like about... It's probably close to like... let me think. Probably close to like about 120 in cat years.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, I remember my nan and granddad had a male cat called Charlie who had like 3 legs, and he lived until he was like about... God, what was it? Probably, I think, about like 18 in human years.
Well.
You know, which in cat years is about like 125 or so. But getting back onto the topic of our day out, After that,
Yeah, after a very nice lunch,
we
they also had some really nice cakes there. I don't know if we mentioned that,
we kind
of
of
which
did.
we had some.
We kind of did to a certain degree. But after
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
we went to a place that neither of us had ever been in, which was this little liquor store, which unfortunately forgotten the name of actually. But that place was great because they just had like loads of different like vodkas, craft ales, meads, wines, whiskies, beers, ciders, everything, and like
Yeah.
some of them were like real sort of like indie ones that you'd never heard of, and other ones were like really locally produced ones from around Sussex, and oh, it was great. And I mean, it wasn't the biggest like shop ever, but they had so much variety and stock in there. It was great.
Yes, definitely. No, I think we both came out with a small selection of what we thought were our favourites from what we'd seen so far. But I think we might be going back there again someday.
Yeah, definitely. I think I picked up a couple of bottles of British mead and one small can of IPA medium ale, which I had
Yeah.
last night, which is all right actually.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I picked up 3 different varieties of mead just to test them out.
You're a bit more into like sort of the sweet alcohols than I am, though, aren't you?
Yeah, sweet and bitter rather than sort of dry. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, the thing is, I have quite a sweet tooth for like food and stuff, but like
Mm.
it's weird because like with my drinks, I usually like them just pretty straightforward and simple. Except for the odd occasion when I get something like an iced coffee or a smoothie, then I like it to be nice and sweet. But I don't often drink fizzy drinks, and I pretty much never put sugar in my hot drinks either. But
Yeah, no.
but despite all that, I'll admit I do like the odd occasional bit of mead, especially since that time that you got me to try it a few weeks ago, where I
Yeah, no, that was good.
where I put a reaction video of me trying it up on the Titan's Head channel,
Yes.
and it was just such a weird video. I don't know why I put that up on there. It's just,
It was fairly random.
yeah, I just thought, oh, I'll just vlog me just trying mead for the first time with Phil, and it ended up getting like about a dozen views in like a couple of hours. Um,
Yeah.
but I was going to say then, after we went to the liquor store, we then also had a pretty good adventure going out into the comic shops of the Southern Lanes, although we didn't buy much there. All I bought was a couple of action film DVDs.
Yeah, yeah, I bought a couple of DVDs from the second-hand DVD shop Time Slip, which is on the same street, just sort of near Sydney, near the entrance to Sydney Street. And then we went to the comic book shop on Sydney Street, where I'd been hoping to purchase the next volume in the Legend of Korra sequel comic series. But unfortunately, they don't seem to have it, and it seems to be some sort of problem with importing it from America.
Well, yeah, I can understand that. I was just going to say, when does the Korra comics take place in the timeline of that series?
They take place immediately after, as in within seconds of the end of the final episode.
Oh, of like season 4.
Whereas
of
the
TV show.
Avatar: The Last Airbender continuation comics take place about a year after the end of the series.
Yeah, and they follow like the team's like attempts to like find like Zuko's mother and like mop up long-term loose ends and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The few things that were left open at the end of the series are in the comic series, and it's sort of basically like the build-up to the Legend of Korra, with sort of building the newer, more industrialized society in the sort of newer, more multicultural world, and how their societies deal with that, basically.
Yeah, which is quite
Which is always an interesting conflict to examine.
Yeah, because like you look at the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it's pretty sort of, uh, it is very sort of like rooted in old, ancient forms of like Tibetan, Japanese, and Inuit sort of culture. So it was like you expect, like if they continue the franchise generally with another series, at some point it would have to modernize and come out of like come out of like being a more holistic society to being a much more, like you said, industrial one, like we see in Korra.
Yeah, totally.
Um, I know it's still a bit of a controversial statement, but I do still generally prefer Korra just slightly more.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that before with the understanding that we both love both series, but I think I do still prefer the original
Yeah,
series just ever so slightly more.
which is fair enough, because there's also a lot more episodes of the original in which you get more time to know the characters and get more time to.
Yeah, that is the series' main advantage over Legend of Korra.
Yeah, to just like develop their characters and just generally get to know them a bit more. One series I think you mentioned before where you've gotten to quite like or get to quite know the characters is the Dishonored series, isn't it? Because you kept talking to me about that quite
Yes,
a
the
lot.
Dishonored video game series.
Yeah, and recently you were quite excited about the release of Dishonored 2, weren't you?
Well, Dishonored 2 has been released for a while, but I've only relatively recently bought it.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
Yes, no, and I was playing it quite a bit over the past couple of weeks, and now I've finished the main story and I'm playing the DLC. The DLC is actually pretty good for both games. And Dishonored 2 really picks up the story of Dishonored. It takes it in quite a good narrative direction, with the young girl who you have to rescue in the first game being the main character in the second one. At least you have the option to play as her. You can choose to either play as the main character from the previous game or as the girl from the previous game, who is now older and is the main character, and is fairly interesting and well developed, actually. And the fact that they have fully voiced characters now makes it a lot easier to become invested. That was one of the main criticisms of Dishonored, the fact that it had a silent protagonist.
I don't think that's always necessarily a bad thing, though, and sometimes it can be quite a good thing if you're going for quite a ambiguous story with the main character acting as the audience proxy, like in the Half-Life franchise.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But in this case, I don't really see that it was a barrier, as indeed the DLC to the original Dishonored proved. They kind of used that as a testing ground to see whether having voiced characters for a sort of moral choice storyline would actually work, and it really does.
I think generally it tends to work better for like singular stories, though, without a moral choice system, kind of like the Half-Life series, because with that you have to accommodate for much less voice acting, and furthermore I think you also have to you're also able to make a more centralised story around the character and how the other actors and other characters around them react to your actions as the main character.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I totally see that.
I mean, I do think like it is more appropriate to not have a silent protagonist in a moral choice system. Hence the reason why I think it is perhaps a little bit more appropriate that series like Mario, Zelda, Half-Life and all that have silent protagonists, because
yeah, that's more of an exploration series, isn't it, where you're supposed to be exploring the world.
Yeah, like all of them are to different extents, but they all have like stories where characters are either expositioning to you or kind of like expressing the themes and like nature of the game by reacting to your own actions within the game, rather than the moral choices you make. Yeah,
definitely. Now, one of the other criticisms of the original Dishonored, on which Dishonored 2 improves, is the fact that it is a moral choice system and you have the option of not killing anyone.
Yeah.
Which I really like about any game. Any game that tries to do that is always going to be quite interesting.
I do think moral choice systems are generally pretty hard to get right, though. I mean, if they can be put in correctly, then they can be fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, in this case, it does actually work out quite well because it gives the game a lot of extra content and it works out quite well with the story that the game is trying to tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the case of the game mechanics, in the original Dishonored, if you're shooting for the good ending, the low chaos ending where you haven't killed very many people,
Yeah.
then you sort of lost all the really fun game mechanics that they put in a lot of effort into developing.
Yeah.
Because at that point you're restricted to either knocking the guards unconscious or shooting them with tranquilizer darts.
Yeah, which gets
Whereas you've got
troll
all
after a
the
while.
really clever creative ways that you could possibly sort of take them out lethally. Whereas in Dishonored 2, every lethal weapon has a non-lethal equivalent.
Yeah. So there's at least some sort of counterpart to every way of playing the game.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I like that.
And they develop a bunch of new powers, some of them similar, some of them completely different. So really allow you to mix up the gameplay quite a lot more than even the original Dishonored did. And the open world, it's not an open world, but the world itself just feels a lot more lived in. And their missions are a lot more varied. You have sort of more puzzle sections as well. It's really quite good, the way they've changed it up. The original Dishonored was good, but Dishonored 2 I think is better.
Is the story writing and acting any better in the second game?
Well, a lot of the criticism of the game is in terms of its sort of lore and world building, in that it just isn't quite as good as the original, even though you have these sort of better characters and a bit more of a story arc, certainly if you're playing as the female character. But I've heard a lot of fan criticism that I can't entirely reject, which is that it doesn't really address a lot of the sort of mysteries and open questions that were left at the end of the first Dishonored game about how the sort of magic system in the world works. But I think that the DLC that I'm playing through now is going to answer that.
Yeah.
Now, I definitely recommend it. The Dishonored series is sort of one of my favourite series of games. It's definitely my favourite sort of stealth game series.
I've been meaning to try it for a while, but the thing is, I haven't really played much console games in the last few years because I'm not.
Well, you can get it on Steam.
Oh, can you?
Yeah, I've got it on Steam. I don't have a console.
Oh wow, okay, I didn't realise that. That's quite a good.
I don't really think. I think it actually probably works a bit better on Steam. I mean, on PC than it would on console.
Yeah. Well,
but I can't be sure, not having played the console version.
That's
yeah, no, the combat system in Dishonored 2 is a lot better. The enemies are more varied. There's more sort of to their intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get enemies with varying skill levels. You get enemies with varying levels of sort of perceptiveness if you're in the stealth mode.
Mm.
So you have to think a lot more tactically about it.
I do quite like that. Like, that's something I noticed when I was playing Metal Gear Solid 2 way back when on the PS2. And I know that game gets a lot of stick, but while its story might not be white hot, say MGS3 or Revengeance, I like it too in that same sense that it's got enemies who fulfill the same roles of trying to detect you and hunt you down, and some of them are clearly more proficient in it than others. And I'm not talking about mini bosses or actual bosses. I'm talking about standard enemies. But you do get some in that game who are somewhat more well equipped to detect you, even if they're not more heavily equipped in terms of weaponry. You can expect them to be backed up by enemies that are, while they themselves are much more proficient in detecting you, setting off alarms, and setting traps and all that. So yeah, I do quite like games where they do try to variate up the standard enemies of a particular type quite a bit, like what you mentioned in Dishonored 2. It shows a bit of attention to detail, because let's face it, if all the standard enemies were one alike, then the game would just be boring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. No, and a lot of the sort of things like the heart mechanic from Dishonored, from the original Dishonored, that allows you to hear individual secrets that is actually it was criticised that wasn't really a gameplay feature. It was just an interesting little bit of world building and exploration. Whereas in Dishonored 2, it actually plays a crucial role in gameplay and indeed in the plot. Whereas in the original Dishonored, it didn't really feature that much.
Do you feel the same way in that regard about that, though?
I think so, actually, yes, because it always struck me as strange that, in Dishonored, you've sort of got, it's a moral choice thing, so you've got your sort of karma meter kind of thing. You're either playing in a sort of high chaos way or low chaos way. And it ties into the plot quite well. And it always struck me as strange that you have a device that allows you to sort of hear a person's darkest secrets, but that didn't sort of feature in the gameplay in any way. But in Dishonored 2, it does. And it means that it depends not just how many people you kill, but who you kill, what your sort of karma level is. It's not actually called that. I'm just using that because that seems to be a sort of popular phrase for describing moral choice gameplay.
Yeah, I am a little bit skeptical about moral choice gameplay just because it's been messed up so many times in the past, but
yeah,
if it's actually intertwined into the gameplay and it's just not just like some bollocks choice at the end of the game like in some games. Now,
oh yeah, definitely.
If it's like an actual sort of like continuous effect that's caused by your actions in the gameplay, like in Dishonored 2 or Dawn of War 2, and it doesn't also like severely inhibit the way you are free to play the game, then I think that's a moral choice system done well.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that. And Dishonored definitely is that. I mean, it does. I think that there are grounds for criticising it. The Zero Punctuation Review series does criticise the moral choice system in Dishonored, and I admit that their criticisms are valid. But I don't know. For me, when I'm sort of trying to sort of play through it stealthily anyway, which is the most fun you sort of have in Dishonored, trying to take out enemies in a stealthy way rather than just doing the combat, which is serviceable, but it's not particularly engaging as such. I just think it was a bit superfluous.
Yeah. What was superfluous? Zero Punctuation's critique?
No, I mean the
the
moral choice gameplay aspect.
Yeah. I can
was a bit superfluous when all the fun you have is by playing it in the stealthy, non-lethal kind of way.
Do you think that's maybe just your own experience and not necessarily the way it's meant to be played, though?
Possibly. Particularly in Dishonored 2, where the moral choice aspect isn't sort of quite forced down your throat as much. Yeah. And I will say they have improved the combat over the first Dishonored game.
Okay, cool.
Because in the first Dishonored, it's just a standard sort of suite of hack and slash and various sort of special powers that you can have. I
do always like the way that the gun animation and gun gameplay looked in the first game, though, because it just looked so clunky.
It is fairly clunky, and that kind of makes sense.
Why is that?
Well, it's sort of set in at like a 19th century level world kind of thing, and it's actually, that's one of my favourite things about Dishonored. The world building is the best thing about the game. You can spend hours just sort of combing through all the little books and notes that are lying around and piecing together what the world is like.
Yeah.
And there's also just a little thing that sort of piqued my interest, is the fact that the society, even though it's sort of heavily kind of steampunk influenced, it isn't a steampunk world in the strictest sense, because the things aren't powered by steam. They're powered by whale oil, which I found really interesting, because whale oil was a major source of fuel and all sorts of other products for a long time before mineral oil was extracted from the ground.
Yeah.
And people kind of forget that. So I like the fact that they brought in that sort of lesser known fuel source, and again they tied it into the kind of world building of the world being sort of quite a vile and dark place, and they tie that into the whaling industry and everything else, and the whaling industry is cleverly tied into the magic system and all the rest of it, because the whales are subtly hinted at being magical. It's really quite people have sort of spent a long time in sort of fan forums debating how the whales fit in with the magic system, and the magic system fits in with the strange demonic figure who gives you your magical abilities. It's definitely something that fans can have a great deal of fun discussing.
I do quite enjoy hearing people such as yourself talking at such depth about how much they enjoy a certain game like that, even if it's not one I might not necessarily like myself, because it kind of reminds me of my initial experiences with Skyrim, which is still probably one of my top 10 favourite games of all time, just period.
Yeah.
I remember having this kind of same experience like that with the theory of how the Dragonborn comes to be in that game, and while that probably is much less it is less subtle than how the whales are used in the Dishonored games. I feel the same way about that as you do about that aspect of the Dishonored series, because for me it's like the way that the Dragonborn came to be, how it relates to the dragons, how the dragons will, coexist in a world where Elduin doesn't, surely has to die at some point, and when you're playing the game, I mean, it's just, again, it's interesting, because like with that as well, there's just forums upon forums since
Definitely. I remember
that game came out, discussing how that has come to be in the universe of the world of Skyrim.
Yeah, definitely. No, I remember when I played Skyrim, it was the most fun that you have is exploring the world and reading all the lore books that are strewn around the place, and Dishonored manages to do that.
Mm.
And for all that their maps, the maps in Dishonored are very small, they're really varied. There's always multiple ways that you can go around, and they pack a lot of sort of hidden Easter eggs in there, both in sort of terms of nerdy references to other games. Very occasionally, they definitely don't dominate the thing like they might do in several other games, but it's that and books on the lore of the world and so on, and that's really something that I always look for in a game.
Depends.
So great world building. I think I've probably spent more time sort of exploring the world and reading everything I could possibly find than I did sort of like fighting or actually being stealthy and sneaking in and fulfilling the objectives.
There was occasions though when I was playing Skyrim though where I did just love just wading into a battle, like particularly when I first joined up with the Imperial Legion. We attacked a bunch of Stormcloak strongholds up and down the country.
Yeah.
And I'd be the first one into the fray, just like knocking over the barricades at the gate with like flame breath, and then just charging with my two-handed Daedric battle axe and just laying into them like the line breaker of like say the berserkers were to like the Gauls or something like that. That always did give me a rush of excitement, whereas like the exploring that you mentioned gave me a more subtle excitement of like, ooh, this game's more deeper than I thought it was. Ooh, this world's quite hefty, isn't it? And I think if you have a game that's either open world like Skyrim or semi-open world like Dishonored, and you're able to have it be like that, where you have it mixtures of rush of excitement as well as more subtle and subdued excitement about the story and characters, then I think you can afford yourself a little pat on the back, really, because that's not easy to do.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, like, the thing is, we can talk end on end about like the basics of like storytelling in video games, but it's quite interesting, like how often you can find examples or like cases where people just forget how to write the basics of a decent, or at just the very least competently followable or relatable story and set of characters. I mean, take for example, what was that game? Before Dawn or something. It was basically the
Forward Until Dawn.
No, that's not the one I was thinking of. It's basically a horror game, like with like multiple choices at each stage, and it's the name will come back to me at some point, but it's pretty terrible, and the story in it is just pants. It's just like based on.
Yeah, I think I know the one you mean. I think Zero Punctuation did a review of it.
It's just based on like basically just stereotypes like characters from horror films and like nothing else, and it's just based on.
Yeah, but isn't that meant to be kind of satirical Isn't it meant to be like Cabin in the Woods, that film that we saw at the Sci-Fi and Horror Society?
I don't think it was, because it seems to take itself far too seriously to like be basing itself upon that kind of premise. It's just and the weird thing is, I wish I could remember the bloody name of it, but I can't, because I remember when it came out, it got loads of really good reviews, and I was like, really? Like, it's such a gimmicky game, and the voice acting in it was beyond terrible. It's like, people were like saying, like, oh, the performances in this game are like unbelievable, and I'm just like, I could have done better in that in A-level drama and theatre studies when I was drunk. Like, it really wasn't anything special.
Oh well.
But yeah, I was going to say, as much as I love Skyrim, that's one aspect of it I would criticise slightly, is the voice acting in it isn't amazing, and they do reuse quite a lot of voice actors.
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well.
Although then again, the majority of the games in the series that do have voice acting in them are guilty of that, so it's kind of motif of the series, really, when you think about it. But like, to be fair, at least it's not as bad as, say, that one instance in Oblivion, where I think it's this random elven woman you come across, and there's a line she says where they forgot to edit this out, where the voice actress messed up one of her lines and said, "Oh, okay, hang on, let me just try that again," and they left a bloody line in the game, and I'm just like, I mean, granted, Skyrim's voice acting is far from perfect, but I always get like people saying to me, like, when I say it's my favourite game in the series, and they say like, "Oh, the voice acting in that was pants," and I was just like, yeah, but so is the voice acting in every other entry into the series. In fact, Oblivion's is probably worse, because, like I just said, they left in actual goofs and outtakes that they didn't mean to put in the game.
Yeah.
Oh my god. What? I'm just watching this IS-6 just donk himself into the ground. Sorry, ISM, I mean.
Yeah.
How is he not dead? Yeah, no, it's, I mean, the thing is like, I do get people sometimes, though, getting a bit overly vociferous in either their defence or love of a certain game in that series, as do, some people with some other series. And while I personally prefer Skyrim the most out of the Elder Scrolls franchise, I would be the first to say it's probably not perfect. As I'm guessing you probably are, from the sounds of things, with Dishonored 2.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's far from perfect. I mean, yeah, well, the combat is serviceable, obviously, but it's not the main focus of the game. And there is a bit of an imbalance in terms of, fighting certain enemies in certain locations. But, I mean, I like the fact that, you're not punished for taking on fights by, I don't know, any kind of arbitrary measure, but, you have to think quite tactically and be realistic about it. In terms of major criticisms of Dishonored 2, the writing isn't that great. Yeah. And, a lot of the several endings that you can have are a bit unsatisfying, in a way. Even the sort of quote-unquote good endings.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps up my thoughts on Dishonored 2, such as they were.
Yeah, I think I might go into Skyrim in a bit more depth in a future video, be it in a podcast or something else on this channel at some point in the future. But yeah, I think we've kind of sort of covered a pretty good range of topics on this.
I'd say so, yes.
Episode of the podcast. I mean, like I kind of said at the beginning of this one, we comparatively haven't had much happen to us in between the space of this podcast and the last one, as in comparison to the time between the last podcast and the one before that. So, we were a little kind of bit strained, really, for room with which to stretch our discussion muscles, so to speak.
Hmm.
But I think we managed to get off a little bit more than we thought. I thought we actually had a really good conversation there about uh, Dishonored 2,
Yeah.
which is good because I've never played it and you've played it quite a lot, so it was good to have sort of like a. So I hope I was acting there as like an audience surrogate for like the people who have never played it before, because I don't think I've even played the first game actually. Come to think of it.
Hmm. Yeah. No, well, I can see that it's not for everyone, and a lot of the criticisms of it that it's a bit short are legitimate. But it's sort of short, but there's a lot of depth to it, and there's a lot of replay value.
Mm.
I mean, I've played the original Dishonored through a couple of times. I think I've actually played the DLC to the original Dishonored game the most, and I think that is probably where the series peaked, to be honest.
What, in the DLC to the first game?
Yeah, because the DLC is basically a whole nother campaign in its own right.
Well, even more so than the content of the second game.
No, the second game is definitely a game in its own right as well, and it has its own DLC, which is in itself another campaign that ties into the main campaign of the game.
Mm.
It's sort of like things that were in the background that needed to still be addressed are what is addressed in the DLC. And one thing that you can't fault the Dishonored team for are their world building skills and their sort of plot development skills, because it takes a lot of intelligence to keep like multiple plates spinning at the same time. When you've got a multiple choice story, you've got to write the dialogue for that and still make it engaging. That's quite a feat of writing, to be honest.
And I guess while the world of the game isn't as like open world as say something like Skyrim or Breath of the Wild, it's still like fairly open, isn't it? So it's not like it's a small world or small game.
No, it's definitely not, and it's definitely not sort of like just running down corridors or something. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you kind of got to expect there's probably going to be some faults with the story and voice acting here and there, because it is such a large game, and that's kind of the reason why, even though I mentioned the really bad sort of like voice acting goofs in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, which came out in 2006, I'm reticent to criticise it full on because of those particular faults, because it was made in 2006, it was made quite a while ago, technology then wasn't as advanced as like say when Skyrim came out, plus it is even though I don't enjoy Oblivion as much, it is a huge game, so it was like a big undertaking just as much as Skyrim was. Not only that, they also had a bunch of mechanics they had to develop quite heavily, like there's quite a considerable crafting, potion making and magic system in Oblivion in comparison to Skyrim, so I don't really blame them that they messed up on a couple of sort of like slightly more minor points about certain aspects of the game, like the voice acting, because it's an enormous game, really, let's face it.
Yeah. Definitely, whereas Dishonored is kind of the opposite. They put in lots and lots of effort into all of those aspects of the game.
Yeah.
And they put it all in a really compact, but really detailed and really explorable world.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's about as good a place to leave it. I would also say, actually, speaking of video games and series that I've never tried before, I did see on PC Gamer earlier today on Facebook that the first Dead Space, as of this video being recorded, is out on Steam for free. So if anyone wants to check that out, why not? I mean, it's like a free FPS. No, sorry, it's not an FPS game, is it? It's a third-person shooter. But it's it's a free third-person shooter horror-themed game that seems to have gotten a good bit of praise over the years. So yeah. And I guess, as is probably pretty obvious, I'd recommend the Elder Scrolls series, and Phil would probably recommend the Dishonored series
Definitely.
Via proxy of discussion. In any case, I think we'd best leave it there because we've pretty much run the discussion well dry. If you do have any future suggestions, any of you lot watching this at home that is, for future episodes of the podcast, or just generally any future ideas for videos on this channel, be sure to leave them in the video description below. I mean, the comment section below. What am I on about? But and if you did like this video, leave a like, share, and subscribe. If you want to, be sure to check out my other YouTube channels, as well as Phil's book review channel in the video description below, as well as my social media platforms. And until next time, stay safe, don't do anything we wouldn't do, have fun with whatever you're doing. And until next time, we'll see you guys on the battlefield.
Flash Suppressor signing off.
Yep, and I've been Gitbag the Great, and see you guys next time.